Hello and welcome to Pointe Church. My name is Caitlin and here are your announcements for the week. This Sunday afternoon, March 13th, from 3 to 5 p.m., we will be having tours of our brand new facility. Don't miss this opportunity to tour our new building because it will be your last chance before grand opening weekend. Speaking of our new facilities, Pointe Church's next Encounter Prayer and Worship Night will be Sunday, March 20th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. This will take place at our new building. Don't miss this chance to experience God's presence in our lives as well as that of Pointe Church's new home. Pointe Church's annual Easter egg hunt will take place Saturday, April 16th from 10 to 11:30 a.m. The event will be bigger and better than ever, taking place in 4 parks in the neighborhood surrounding our new facility. This will be an amazing opportunity not only for our children, but for our new community surrounding Pointe Church. We need everyone's help. Please fill out a volunteer card you were handed when you came in today and turn it in the table in the foyer after service. If you're new to Pointe Church today, welcome. We're so glad you're here. There's an I'm new card in the seat back pocket in front of you. Please take the time to fill that out. You'll get a chance to turn it in later. For more information, please see the church website at copperpointchurch.com. Those are all of your announcements for this week. Enjoy the service.
Well, good morning, everyone. Great to see you, and we're going to have a great time together in the next few moments. I'm starting a brand new series today called 40 Days of Light, and I'm very excited about this. This is the last series that I will talk about and speak on in this facility. And so this is it. This is the last series, and then we're moving on to a new home, and it's going to be very, very exciting. So I want to talk about 40 Days of Light. And you know, the number 40 in the Bible, throughout the Bible, you will find that it's very important, and it carries tremendous significance. Listen to this. When you think about the number 40, Noah's flood lasted 40 days and 40 nights. 40 days the spies searched out the new land. 40 days Moses went up into the mountain to receive the 10 commandments. 40 days Moses went back into the mountain after the sin of the golden calf. Elijah went into the wilderness and waited there 40 days to hear the still small voice of God. Israel spent 40 long years in the desert. Jonah spent 40 days in Nineveh proclaiming the power of God. 40 days Jesus was tempted by the devil in the wilderness. Jesus also spent 40 days after he was risen from the grave visiting with his disciples. And the number 40, when you look at this, it signifies a time of testing and then completion. Guys, we are 40 days away from moving into our brand new church home. Are you excited about that? Wow, that is amazing. 40 days away. And you know, we have come to the end of what seems like wandering in the desert for 40 years. I want to tell you, it has been a long, long process. And I look back over that, and there were many times that from the very beginning, I knew God was leading us out to build a new property, a new home that we could expand in and that we could use, and we've outgrown this one. And so I knew that, and yet over many years, door after door after door has slammed in our faces, and we've gone through 2 financial campaigns, and it was like, God, where in the world are you in all of this? But what is so amazing is yesterday I was walking through our new facility, and you know, they're still sheetrocking and still building and all of that, but so much of it is done, and I'm walking through this thing, and this verse came to mind: exceeding abundantly above all that you could ask or think. Guys, 7 years I have thought and have dreamed of this project, and I want to tell you, yesterday when I walked through it, it's bigger than I ever imagined. It's further along than I could have ever dreamed. It goes beyond my imagination. When you see this afternoon, you're going to be blown away by what God has given to us. The design, the flow of this facility, the magnitude of the facility, I mean, it goes beyond what we as a church really are capable of doing, and God is so incredible. And what I feel like is that we have been through a time of testing, and now we're coming out of that testing time, and what you find, the number 40 in the Bible, every time, a time of testing, and then it's followed by a new opportunity, a new awakening, and a new anointing. And we have gone through difficulties and darkness, but we're moving into blessing and illumination, because again, all of this becomes very, very clear. When you step foot into that building today, it's all going to be clear, if you have ridden through this with us, that all of this testing now is for a purpose, that God, the right timing, the right moment, and right when the economy was at its lowest, that God gave us this building, and it is absolutely a miracle. You see the light at the end of the tunnel. I've talked about 40 for a moment. I want to talk about light just for a couple of minutes. In Ephesians chapter 5 and verses 8 through 10, it says, "For you were once in darkness, but now you are the light of the Lord, and walk in that light." That we have a light that is shining inside of us. Also in Philippians 2 and verses 15 and 16, "In the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world." Listen to what that's saying. That as you walk through a sin-cursed world, it is crooked and it is perverse, and as you rub elbows with people that are far away from God, Christ in you shines like a bright star. There's a light that comes forth, and people are drawn to the lights. One of our young men here in the church, Garrett Stidworthy, was sharing a story with us that he and his family went to Carlsbad Caverns, and they were having a great time and took a private tour. A small group of them went with a tour guide to the very bottom of the caverns, and they got down to the bottom, and the lady that was guiding them said, "We're about to turn off the lights, and you're going to experience an utter darkness that you have never experienced in your life. It is absolute darkness. It's the blackest black, the darkest dark that you could ever imagine." She said, "Also, I'm carrying with me a little small pin light, and after we sit in darkness for a little bit, I'm going to light this light up and turn it on, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about this darkness." So the lights went off, and Garrett said it was the blackest black, and your eyes could not adjust because there is not even a hint of light for your eyes to adjust to. Sitting in that darkness for about 30 seconds, he said it was just eerie. It was one of the most eerie things he's ever experienced in his life. And then in that darkness, he said, "Now I'm going to take this little tiny pin light and I'm going to turn it on." Garrett was imagining that when she turned it on, that it would light up her face and where she could talk to everyone in the darkness. When she turned on that light, to everyone's amazement, it filled that entire huge room that they were sitting in, the size of the Dallas Cowboy football stadium. And it lit up that entire room, and she said, "You were amazed that something so small could light up a room this large." She said the reason why is because light has its greatest effect in utter darkness. The darker it is, the brighter the light shines. This last week I was speaking at a conference in Kansas. They introduced me as being from Albuquerque, and afterwards a lady came to me and she said, "You know, our family lived in Albuquerque for a short time. We've been all over the United States, lived in many cities, and we were stationed there just for a short time." But she said, "Out of all the cities that we've ever lived in, Albuquerque, we found, was the darkest city we've ever been in." I thought about that for a moment, and I thought how interesting that is, that I have family that lives only 4 hours away from here in Amarillo, Texas. You can head down I-40 4 hours from here, and I want to tell you, when you enter into Amarillo, it's a different world spiritually than it is here. It's like the epitome of the Bible Belt, and that it's the culture of people going to church, but I want to tell you, in Albuquerque, it's not that way. Albuquerque is dark. Albuquerque is far away from God. But this is what is amazing, is that the darker the night, the greater the light. And that we have an opportunity to share our light and let our light shine, and people are attracted to the light. You know, the theme of light goes all through the Bible, and there is a great theme talking about the power of light. And as Christians, what we find is that many times our role as Christians becomes very confusing, and we really don't know how that we are to live out this Christian life. Throughout history, when you go back and look at church history, that you'll find that there have always been two extremes of how people have lived it out. On one side, all the way over here, there's this extreme of isolation, and what people do is they receive Christ, and they have found this new life, and now they're going to isolate from a sinful world, and they're going to hold back the world, and they're going to protect themselves and their children, and nobody's getting in. It's complete isolation. On the other end of the spectrum, you have people then that compromise. They accept Christ, and yet they never truly buy in fully. And when they're with their classmates at school or workmates at work, or if they are in their social environments, that they just pick up the behavior and the values of everybody else, and they are not living out the values of Christ, but living out the values of the world. You know, anytime that a little Christian group forms, that Christians get together and they seem to want to huddle together. That's just kind of what happens. That we as born-again believers, followers of Christ, we want to huddle together and we want to meet our own social and spiritual needs. But the problem with that is what we're doing across our nation is that we're building churches so removed from our unsaved peers that it's becoming almost virtually impossible to reach them for Christ. There was one professor from the University of Chicago who describes this view of Christian isolation, and he says there is a broad distance between the church and the world. And the concern is that Christ has sent the church into the world, and we cannot dare lose touch with those in the world without Christ. How true that is. Jesus in chapter 17 of John chapter 17, he's praying to his heavenly Father, and he's praying for his disciples. It's an incredible prayer that he prays. Listen to part of it. Here in verses 15 and 16, he says, "My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even though I am not, even as I am not of the world. And as you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. And our purpose is to remain in this world for the sake of the world." That's why we're here. The dilemma is this. We read verses such as 1 Corinthians 6:17, and it says, "Come out from the world and be separate." And we know what that means. That when we receive Christ, that we come out of the world. We no longer live like the world. We now take on the nature of Christ, and we are separate from the world, and therefore we want to separate ourselves from those that are in sin. But then you read another verse, as in John 17 and verse 18, where he says, "I am sending you into the world." And how do you strike the balance between the two? How are you to be in the world and yet be separate from the world? And there's great confusion there. You know, whenever Jesus was teaching and was trying to make a point, what he would do many times is he would use something very common to the people, day-to-day situations or illustrations. And I want to do the same for the next few moments on explaining this. In the business world, there have been some radical changes in the last few years. You know, businesses failing here in America and not doing really well, and there are new books coming out, and what they're talking about, that American businesses need to go back to the basics. And what that really is talking about is where everyone in that organization, in that business, that they create a strong focus and put all of their energies on the only reason why they exist, and the only reason is for the customer. God, it sounds so basic and so elementary. Shouldn't every business and every organization already know that? That we exist for one reason, for the customer? And yet, how often do we go into a department store, or we go to a bank, or we go to a restaurant, and we can't get service? The customer service stinks. You are there at the table, you've eaten, you need to go, you're in a hurry, you've got to get back to work, and you cannot track down the waitress. Nowhere in sight, hasn't been back to the table, and it's frustrating. You can stand in line at the bank, or you can be in a department store and feel like people are passing you by and everybody's ignoring you and nobody is focusing on you as the customer. And that you can be in a store and you need to know what this cost, or you need information about this, and you can't track anyone down. In fact, the people that work there, you feel like they're running away from you instead of trying to come and help you. And it's just bad customer service. And what has happened in those kinds of businesses is that the employees have allowed themselves to become ingrown. Now what they have done is they have turned everything, all of their energies, all of their sights are now on internal problems, policy disputes, internal strife, and the employee has lost sight of their real purpose. That their existence and the reason why they have a job and the reason why they're getting paid is for the customer and not for themselves. Whenever you look at the business world and the church world, they're close cousins. Because churches will do the very same thing. I mean, we should know that it's so basic that why we exist as a church is to win the lost. It's about the people out there. But we do the very same thing that businesses do. We are the workers of the church. We are here and we begin to lose focus, and we begin to get entangled in all of the issues, the internal issues and the personal preferences. And it's hard to remember that the primary reason why we remain on this planet is to reach people. In the business world, people out there really matter. For the church world, how much more should people out there really matter to us? And let's be honest, in the business world and also in the church world, that it's very easy for us to lose our focus on the people out there. Has the church lost its focus? Has the church across our nation, have we really lost focus of what this thing's all about? You know, I give statistics all the time. I love statistics, and one that I've heard for many, many years is that 40% of Americans attend church. Wow, we can say that is incredible. I mean, that's really pretty strong. We're a solid Christian nation, and 40% is okay. But what we have found in the last couple of years, experts have done more extensive research, and they've gone into all denominations across America, and they have looked at who really attends church. This is what they found. 40% of the people in America say they go to church. 17% of the church, or the people of America, are faithful to church. Only 17%. You know, last year, a little over 1,000 churches started in America. We can applaud that. Over 1,000 brand new churches sprung up, but at the very same time last year, 4,000 churches across America closed their doors. By current trends, children born in the last 5 years, they're saying if we follow the trend that we're in spiritually right now as a nation, these kids born in the last 5 years, only 4% of them will serve Christ as adults. Right now in Europe, 4% are followers of Christ in Europe. 4% of the people. And we're on the heels of Europe, headed in the very same direction. And when you look at all of these things, if the church were a corporate business, and we would follow these stats, they would be on the verge of bankruptcy. Because the church forgot who the customer is. You know, one of the central themes of Jesus' ministry, when you follow the Gospels and you follow his teaching, he was addressing this very issue because the church has always had a tendency to drift. Jesus, on one occasion, was speaking in a metropolitan area, and what he found himself surrounded by that day was a huge crowd of irreligious people. He noticed all of a sudden that all of these people that I've attracted, I mean, they've come out by the hundreds and by the thousands, and they are far from God. But as he speaks to them that day, well, they're tuned in, they're locked in, and they are listening to every word he speaks. As he's speaking to them, he notices out of the corner of his eye, there's a small group of religious people that are all huddled together over here, and they were the Pharisees, the religious leaders, huddled together and shaking their head in disagreement to what he was saying. In fact, this is what they were saying. They were saying, look at him. He calls himself the Son of God, and look at the crowd that he has drawn. He's drawn an ungodly crowd, and these are the people that he hangs out with. How dare him even claim to be spiritual? And Jesus knew exactly what they were thinking and what they were saying. All of a sudden, what Jesus did, as he was speaking to the large crowd of people far away from God, he turns his attention to the religious. And he walks over to them, and he looks them dead into the eye, straight on, and says, there once was a shepherd who had 100 sheep. And as he brought the sheep in one night, that he counted them out, and he counted 99 and realized one was missing. And the shepherd was frantic, and he left the 99, and he took off into the night, and he searched for the lamb, and the lamb was missing, and he knew that it could be devoured by lambs. And what would he find? Would he find his lamb destroyed? And his heart was pounding as he searched through the night, and he called for the lamb, and he looked, and he looked, and he looked, and then all of a sudden he heard the sound of a little lamb, and he rushed over to it, and he found it, caught in a thicket, and he pulled it out, and tenderly he put it over his shoulders, and he walked back to where all the other sheep were, and he put the little lamb down, and he was so relieved. He was so excited that he found that which was lost, that he called all the other shepherds in the region to come together that night, and they threw a party and they celebrated. And as he talked to these religious leaders, eye to eye, is telling them that story, he pauses. And it must have been an awkward pause, just staring at these religious people. You see, whenever you're a public speaker, you know exactly when you have the crowd and when you've lost the crowd. Jesus that day, a public speaker, was speaking to these people, and what he saw when he told that story, there was a glazed look over their eyes, and they did not get what he was saying. After that long pause, looking at them directly again, he said, "And there once was a woman who had 10 coins. She had 10 coins, and she counted them out, and she found that there were only 9 that were there. She had lost a coin. She was frantic. It was her survival. She had to have the money, and she started turning over furniture and lifting up rugs, and she was searching and searching for the lost coin, frantic. She grabbed a broom, and she started sweeping, and she swept through the entire house until out underneath something, the coin came out, and she found the coin. She was so relieved and so excited that she called all of her neighbors to come over to the house that night and to celebrate, and they threw a party because that which was lost was now found." Pauses. Glazed look over the religious leader's eyes, and what he said did not penetrate, and they did not understand. And he went into a third story. There once was a man who had 2 sons, and one son was rebellious. And he demanded for his father to give him his inheritance, and the father was reluctant and did not want to give it to him, but he was rebellious and he wanted his money. "I want my inheritance." And finally the father gave it to him. That son walked out that door that day with a pocket full of money, and he was ready to live the fast life in the fast lane. He was ready to live it up, and he gathered all kinds of friends around him, and they partied every night, the time of their lives. He spent every penny that he had. And when the money was gone, the friends were gone, and he found himself without any home, without any food. And he found himself one day sitting, working in a pig lot, feeding pigs, and sitting in that mud. He came to his senses and said, "My father may never receive me back by what I have done, but at least I could go back to my father and ask him to be one of his hired hands. It would be a better life than this." Picked himself up, and he headed home. Walking down that long dirt road, he could see his house in the distance. As he wound down that road and up that road he went, his heart was pounding because he had no idea what to expect. He didn't know if his father would receive him back or not. But as he traveled down that road, all of a sudden he saw someone that was coming his way. In that far distance, he could tell that that person was running, and he could see the robes flapping in the wind. And as he got closer and closer, it was his father. His father was coming. And all of a sudden, his dad threw his arms around his son, and he embraced him and kissed him on the cheek. And he was so happy that his son who had been gone, his son that was lost, had now returned. He had looked for him every single day while he was gone. He finished that story, and it was the first time and the only time recorded in Scripture that Jesus told 3 stories just like that, back to back. But the reason why was because on that day he was so disturbed over the discussion the religious people were having about who matters to God and who doesn't. They were over there criticizing him because these people don't matter. We matter. And the sinful and the corrupt, every person matters. You know, we hate to admit this, but every one of us carry an unpublished list of people that we would consider as unimportant. I do it. You do it. We all do it from time to time. Passing by people and never giving it a thought. Someone such as a waitress or a bellhop or a cashier. Someone driving too slow in front of you and you're so irritated at them. A neighbor who has a barking dog. The intoxicated person sitting next to you on the airplane. The guy who is at work who doesn't have the same view of the world that you have, and he frustrates you. You know, we can write them off and bypass them and not want to speak to them and really not want to have them in our lives at all. But they matter to God. And if they matter to God, then they better matter to us. In Jesus' parables, he was really telling us that if you've ever locked eyes with someone, if you've ever locked eyes with a person, then every person that you look into their eyes is someone who is incredibly valuable to God. If you'll ever let that grip your life, it'll change who you are as a person. It'll change who you are at school, who you are at work, who you are in your neighborhood, because all of a sudden you begin to carry on the understanding and the very nature of God that this person is incredibly valuable and I must invest in. About 4 years ago, we started taking a hard look at our church and who we were, and we found that we were very ingrown. It was all about us. It was all about our ministries, all about our Bible studies, all about our prayer groups. It was all about us. We changed everything. We changed every ministry we had, and we said, you know what, we're going to change this, and we're going to get back to the basics, and we're going to make this about the people out there. And so we started moving in that direction, and all of a sudden people started coming to Christ, and our crowd started growing, and we started adding people to our congregation, and for the first time ever, we as a church went to 2 services. Man, we made that small little step. We're just going to go to 2 services. And people who had been in this church for 20 and 30 and 40 years came unglued. They just were upset. And we had never done that before, and you're dividing us up as a church, and now when we come to church, we won't see our friends because we'll come to that service, and then they'll be in that service, and I mean, people were upset over it. There was one Sunday morning, after the service, I'd been out in the foyer, and I was talking with people, visiting, and almost everyone had gone, and I was walking to the hallway, and there was a lady standing there, and I could tell that she wanted to talk to me. And as I walked down the hall, she said, I need to speak to you. And I knew by the tone of her voice and the look on her face it was not going to be a good conversation. And so I stood there, and she started in, and she was saying, you know, I've been here longer than you've been here, and I don't like your vision. I don't like where we're going as a church. And as she continued to talk, she made this statement. She says, don't you think the church is big enough now? I understand the thing about evangelism. I understand all of that. But don't you think that the church is now big enough? The next few moments, she didn't like what I had to say. And I didn't like what she had to say. And we walked away from that conversation, and she was mad, and she did not talk to me for a solid year. She would pass me in the hallways, and she would avoid me, and she would not speak to me, and I would see her from time to time off with little huddles of people, and it was like poison. She was just pouring out that we're going in the wrong direction. This is not the right vision. I don't like what's happening here, and it was just poison. One Saturday morning, I received a call. There's this woman on the phone, and the moment I picked up the phone and heard her voice, I could tell it was a voice of desperation. And she said, Pastor, I need you to come to my house. I need you to come now. My son is here, and he is desperate. And I knew a little bit about what was going on in his life, and that he had gotten in with the wrong crowd, that he gotten involved in drugs. He'd now been arrested, and his life was caving in. And he was at the house at this point, and he hated church, and he hated God. And what he had seen in his own home from his own mother was a lifetime of dead religion that did not add up. And he rebelled against it. As I drove to their house that Saturday morning, I could not get this out of my head. It was like ringing in my head, this one phrase, Pastor, don't you think the church is big enough? Don't you think the church is big enough? I walked into the front door, and I knew that God was wanting me to speak to this woman about that very thing. And I wasn't trying to jab her, but I sat down at that dining room table that day, and I said, before I go to the bedroom and talk to your son, I want to talk to you. You have not spoken to me in a year. In our last conversation that we had, you made a statement. Isn't the church big enough, Pastor? Why does it have to grow? And I said, before I go back and talk to your son, do you believe the church is too big and there's no room for your son? At that very moment, sitting at that dining room table, there was a dead religion that burned off of her. Something radically changed in her life. It was like she started melting in that chair. And I went back to that back bedroom and I spent time with him, and we offered him help, and we in prayer and guidance and counseling, and we helped him in that recovery process. And what she learned that day was that the church is never too big when you love someone. Whenever you think about your son who is lost and far away from God, is the church too big for one more? If your daughter is far away from God, is the church too big because it makes us uncomfortable? You see, when you love someone, it's never too big. There's always room for one more. You know, the next thing that we learn from Jesus' 3 stories is that which is missing was important enough to warrant an all-out search. You ever noticed that? You lose something. You lose something that's valuable to you. You lose your wallet. You lose your keys. You lose a wedding ring. It's valuable to you. You will turn the house upside down. You will go through every nook and cranny of your car trying to find what is lost because it is valuable to you. The shepherd retrieved a lamb because the lamb was valuable, and he threw a party. The woman found the coin because the coin was valuable, and she searched for it, and she threw a party. The son came home, and the father was so thrilled the son was now found that he threw a party. And in Luke chapter 15 and verse 10, Jesus says, "In the same way I tell you, there is a rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." You know what Jesus was doing when he told those 3 stories in a row to the religious? Is he was opening up a doorway of the supernatural and letting them see what happens in heaven when these lost people come to the understanding of who Jesus Christ is. And when someone receives Christ into their life, there is an explosion, a party that takes place in heaven every time someone comes to Jesus Christ, because that which was lost is so valuable. It is now found, and it thrills God, and it thrills all of heaven at such a degree that they throw a party every single time. Pretty amazing, isn't it? How often we forget how important to all of us those people out there really are. What's our purpose? Why have we gathered here this morning? What's our purpose? It is to proclaim Christ everywhere. Whenever you think about your son who is lost and far away from God, is the church too big for one more? If your daughter is far away from God, is the church too big because it makes us uncomfortable? You see, when you love someone, it's never too big. There's always room for one more. You know, the next thing that we learn from Jesus' 3 stories is that which is missing was important enough to warrant an all-out search. You ever noticed that? You lose something. You lose something that's valuable to you. You lose your wallet. You lose your keys. You lose a wedding ring. It's valuable to you. You will turn the house upside down. You will go through every nook and cranny of your car trying to find what is lost because it is valuable to you. The shepherd retrieved a lamb because the lamb was valuable, and he threw a party. The woman found the coin because the coin was valuable, and she searched for it, and she threw a party. The son came home, and the father was so thrilled the son was now found that he threw a party. And in Luke chapter 15 and verse 10, Jesus says, "In the same way I tell you, there is a rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." You know what Jesus was doing when he told those 3 stories in a row to the religious? is he was opening up a doorway of the supernatural and letting them see what happens in heaven when these lost people come to the understanding of who Jesus Christ is. And when someone receives Christ into their life, there is an explosion, a party that takes place in heaven every time someone comes to Jesus Christ, because that which was lost is so valuable. It is now found, and it thrills God, and it thrills all of heaven at such a degree that they throw a party every single time. Pretty amazing, isn't it? How often we forget how important to all of us those people out there really are. What's our purpose? Why have we gathered here this morning? What's our purpose? It is to proclaim Christ everywhere.